Some of my family members that were there with us mentioned that the house had not been blessed and that it was likely haunted. One night, my mom woke up suddenly. She got up and left the room to use the bathroom. As she was walking down the stairs to the bathroom, she claims to have seen what looked like a random guy with a hat walk past her and go down the stairs and walk outside of the house. At first, she thought it was just my oldest brother just wanting some fresh air. So, she thought nothing much of it and proceeded to use the bathroom. After doing her business, she went to go and check on who she thought was my brother, only to discover the front of the house was empty. She went up to the other room and saw everyone asleep, and she got chills, but ultimately just went back to bed. The one I encountered, though, wasn't like any other story I've ever heard about. I was in the room with my mom, auntie, grandma, and uncle. My mom and I had a thing to sleep on the floor while my granny and aunt and uncle slept on the bed. I was sitting on the floor bed as I looked on the doorway. The door was opening, and I saw a hand slowly reach out and just slowly started reaching and stretching out toward me. I started crying and freaking out and pointed at it and started hiding under the blanket. As everyone was clueless and didn't see anything, I then hid behind my mom as I looked up to the bed. My uncle had his back turned against me and my mom, but from where he was facing, the wall, the same hand looks like it stretching and raising its hand from me, and I scream, "Ma, I see a hand." But she was oblivious to what I was seeing and didn't care. I went to sleep under my blanket while my family was just having a normal conversation in the room. It's not the scariest story, but this is my encounter with these creatures. And thank you for sharing if you end up doing it. I was camping, and there was something out there with us. I could hear it all over the area, like it was stalking us, but I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want them to panic. It never came close enough to bug us, but I could tell if we had passed into the woods any deeper, the creature was just there waiting for us. It's definitely not a Wendigo or a skinwalker. It was something else. Something more akin to the rake, maybe. But it was so wrong. It was tall, thin, and white, with piss yellow eyes and black stains of, like... Do you guys know Gollum from Lord of the Rings? Had black strains of hair like that. Just absolutely sickly looking. I only saw it once for a split second. It was on the last day, but it was all I needed to see, because when I saw it, I knew it had been following us for days on the edge of the woods. We had been camping, and this thing had to be some kind of demon or mythic creature that humans were never meant to deal with alone, as it wasn't natural. It somehow kept up with us the whole way. When I looked back, it was practically right on our bumper. I know there's no outrunning it, and if that's true, it stands to reason it's probably too strong for us to fight outright. I don't shy away from anything, though. It does make me contemplate if I'd be nothing more than a momentary speed bump in its life, if I had decided to attack it, or if it had decided to attack us. Stay safe out there, everyone. I know my story is short, and definitely not too detailed. I just wanted to cut off all the other story stuff because the only thing that matters was this encounter and sighting. I'll start by saying no. This isn't my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have since asked each of my friends through the years to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000. About a year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends. And that's when I first heard about this dog or wolf story. I have since asked each friend over the years and miles apart, and they all remember the same encounter. Before my ex was even my boyfriend, let's call him Jay. He and our other friends were about 17 to 18 years old. At that age, I remember it being an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's hike and do this and puff. The good old days, when we got away from parents and had a day planned around just smoking. simpler times. It was Jay and his best friend B and their girlfriends S and M. The four of them decided to drive to Mount Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area outside of Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but it's nature in its pride for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly what trail they are on. The main one that connects the parking lot to the river. They had driven in B's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and then walked to the river. On the way to the river from the lot, there is a very small bridge that crosses a small creek. This will be relevant for later. The group spent the day out there, swimming and puffing, puffing and swimming, just being typical Oregon teens. I can imagine that hunger is what drove them to go home after a few hours. As the sun began to set, either activity alone is bound to get someone hungry, let alone both. So, they walked along the well-worn main dirt path to the parking lot. This path has since been paved, according to Google Maps. It doesn't take but 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot they had crossed when they hiked in. When they reached this small footbridge near the parking lot, B looked out into the vast field between them and the wooded mountain, and noticed a huge dog near the tree line. It was roughly about 100 yards away. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary, just looking like a humongous friendly dog. It was starting to get dark, but from M and J's descriptions, and the drawings he did for me later in 2005, it was very shaggy and furry. I may even still have the notebook where she drew the dog thing in it. If I find it, I'll share it. My friends continued to walk across this small wooden bridge, and one of the girls agreed. The dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer. When they had seen it a couple of seconds earlier, it was on all fours, like I said, in much further away. It traversed most of the large field in seconds. Whatever this thing was, it was fast, quiet, and incredibly stealthy. My four friends ran to the car, and they had the classic cliche, I can't get the key in moment, because B was fumbling madly for the keys. At this point, the dog was standing on its hind legs, at the very edge of the parking lot, looking at them. It still had the dog face, still had the dog body, but it was standing up. They never saw it walking on all fours, just two. It was like every time they looked up, it was just standing there, closer and closer. As Jay had said, every time they looked up, he was closer but not moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see a dog standing on its hind legs like that. They said this thing was super tall, though. Like, they thought it was easily like 6.5 to 7 feet, maybe. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks and then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way they described it. Many times I asked them, are you sure it wasn't a bear? And they definitely know it wasn't a bear. They're for sure that it was a dog standing on its hind legs. A big dog that was stalking them. This all happened in Lane County, Oregon, in the year of 2000. There are a few bears, if any, out there, but it would be odd. But then again, I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving the Pisgah dog to his own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, S doesn't even like talking about the incident at all because it's too creepy for her to recall. This story takes place in the deserts of Arizona. Me and my dad are on a camping trip with the rest of our family, but thanks to the size of my family, we had to take 2 cars. One car was just for boys and one for girls. I had 3 sisters, but I was the only boy. 3 hours later, and nightfall approaches, making it harder to drive with only one headlight working at the time, so my dad decides we should stop and camp there for the night. I said I was down as long as we sleep in the car. That's not really camping, but if you had to choose between a car seat and the ground, then I think you know what I was doing. Anyways, he agreed, so we drove off the road onto the sand with cactus as far as you could see. We both began our descent into slumber, only I I couldn't, as I was a bit of an insomniac, which I was fine with. It just meant I could look up at the night sky and enjoy it. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a curdling screech of some kind, coming from somewhere in the vast emptiness of the desert. At first, I thought it was a coyote, but coyote doesn't really sound like that. Frozen solid, I look out the window to see a tall, lanky creature standing on all fours. Its appendages were extremely long and unnatural looking. At first glance, it would have been just blending in with the cacti surrounding the area, with a seemingly prickly skin. But I didn't just peek and look away. I was flat out staring at it until my eyes locked with its two small white dots. I believe these were its eyes. I am dropping bricks in my pants at this point. But those bricks turned to boulders as it full out charges at the small car, which could easily be flipped with little effort. I guess with all that commotion, my dad must have woken up, because before I knew it, we were driving off of the sand back onto the road, flooring it. Suddenly, the back window was smashed in with the creature slamming its two-fingered hand into the glass screen, sending shards everywhere. It didn't follow us for much longer, as it had glass shrapnel in its hand. It started to slow down and limp away, leaving blood marks on the back door. We kept driving without looking back, fearing to see it again. Eventually, we caught up with the rest of the family. Once there, we all shared the same expressions on our faces. It was a look of terror. That day is one I'll never forget. As it happened in Scotland, I was told it could not be a skinwalker. So when I found the show, I thought I'd share it here and see what you all think. Some things I'd like to note. While I don't live in a tiny village like this encounter happened in, I do live in a small town in Scotland, so I am familiar with many animal sounds. It was not an owl or a fox, both of which I'm very familiar with as I live near a lot of them. I hope you all enjoy reading my experience. So, a little over a year and a half ago, I went to stay with my grandmother in the countryside. She lives in a tiny village in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. My grandfather has recently passed after a long illness. I was worried she might be lonely, so I went to stay for a while. One night there, it was perhaps 1 a.m. I couldn't sleep, so I was on my laptop in the guest bedroom that had formerly belonged to my grandfather. It had new furniture, etc., to make it a guest room, as his hospital bed and all that were taken back. As I'm on my laptop, I hear what sounds like a flock of chickens going by the window, going nuts and clucking. I think nothing of this and chuckle to myself, thinking the neighbor's chickens had gotten out. I'm about to go check the window, thinking that there's something going on. Maybe if I just put some food out and try to herd them into the garden, maybe they'll, leave me alone and stay in one area and not get lost before I reach the window. However, the noise of chickens changes and begins to blend together into a noise that gets louder and louder until it doesn't sound like chickens anymore. It sounds like a screaming that has me frozen in place. It no longer sounds like multiple voices of animals. So I knew it wasn't a flock of chickens being attacked by a fox or something. It was now a hellish screaming noise that was directly outside my window, which was thankfully covered by curtains. It stayed at my window for perhaps 5, maybe even 10 minutes while I'm frozen from fear in the middle of the room, before it left and I could hear the screaming get more and more distant until it was gone. I honestly have no idea what I heard. I was too scared to talk to my grandmother about it the next day. headlights illuminated a small, lanky, gray and white creature on the side of the canal. As soon as the headlights hit the crawler, it leaped into the darkness of the canal. With similar ease as a cat might jump, both my friend and I immediately shouted, "What the heck is that?" The chupacabra is my area's local cryptid legend, so we immediately assumed that, until I heard of the existence of the crawler. I had been thinking a chupacabra was what I saw, or some type of alien. But descriptions of the chupacabra don't accurately describe this crawler. The many descriptions of the crawler are spot on with what I saw. The second encounter was at my house. Occasionally, I would climb up onto the second story of my family home for a bit of stargazing. While laying on my back, staring into the sky, I heard a noise coming from the other end of the roof. Thinking it was probably a possum messing around, I tilted my head from the sky to the direction of the sound. Something was slowly moving towards me in the dark, from the end of the roof. For a few moments, I stayed in place, just trying to figure out what this was, trying to focus and make a solid identification of what animal was coming toward me. It wasn't until the creature got about halfway across the roof. My eyes could finally pick up on the features, disqualifying it from being any other animal native to my area. It looked like a small hairless person, crawling on its lanky hands and feet. Needless to say, I didn't stick around any longer. I hauled ass down the tree I'd come up on, back to the safety of my house. I don't know where it went after that. Thank you for sharing my story, and I hope somebody who's listening can possibly help me understand crawlers more. A couple of years ago, I had a weird encounter behind my house. There's a bunch of trees and manzanita bushes behind my house as well. Typical Northern California flora. My black lab was outside around 11:30 p.m. when she let out the most scared-sounding bark I've ever heard. I went out to see what was happening and what she was barking at, and started shining my flashlight around. I didn't initially see anything. The dog barked again, and I caught sight of the humanoid creature as it shifted positions. It was maybe 15 feet away from me. The encounter lasted probably only 2 minutes. The creature was very geometric and generally thin. Its body was rectangular, maybe 2 feet across, long and vertically oriented. No tapering at either hip or shoulder. It was partially rounded on the edges, but I would hesitate to describe it as being cylindrical. Its arms seemed longer than its legs, though I admit it could have been crouching. Depending on whether it was crouching or not, I would say it was most likely between 5 and 7 feet tall. At the end of each thin arm was a hand with 6 fingers, long and almost bony. 3 of the fingers were really thick, while the other 3 were much thinner. It had a thin neck, thinner than its arms. Its head is the part that really freaked me out. It was as wide as its body, and totally featureless. No face, no ears, nothing. There was nothing there to indicate that this thing had any eyes or mouth. The head was wider at the top than the bottom, still processing that rectangular cylindrical appearance as the body. Its overall appearance was unnaturally smooth. Its lines were too straight, and the exterior was an incredible shiny black color. I shined my light on the creature, and in spite of not appearing to have any eyes, it seemed to hone in on the flashlight beam, sort of tilting its head and partially pulling itself from behind the tall grass and fallen limbs. It had no sound when it moved, even though I could see the grass moving and see a rather large branch snap as it shifted its weight. I couldn't tell if I thought it was a predator or prey, or if it even thought about me at all. At this point, I decided I didn't want to stick around to find out what it was doing or why. I'm very scientifically minded. I seek to find a rational explanation for things before entertaining the notion that it could be some sort of supernatural phenomenon. I probably would have discounted the whole thing as my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark had my dog not been so visibly perturbed by the whole thing. I've never seen her shake like that. There are deer, mountain lions, coyote, all kind of animals around my house. She doesn't care about any of them. We've been face to face with mountain lions many times. Whatever this was left her scared to go outside for several days afterward. I wouldn't describe this encounter as negative. Terrifying, yes, but the unknown often is. I haven't seen the creature again. I still get goosebumps every time I think about it. Has anyone ever seen anything like this creature I've described? I'd love to get some opinions on my encounter. Most of my life I've lived in the country. I've encountered quite a few scary things in my life, especially out in the backcountry farmlands. Some of these encounters were more supernatural in nature. This one, in particular, was the least of this world. But probably one of the scarier experiences, honestly. It happened over the course of a month. It started out as it always did. Late at night, around midnight, there are no street lamps, and all the neighbors are about 20 acres apart, so it's very dark and very quiet, and of course secluded. You can slightly hear the cars on Highway 75. 4 miles away, it's so quiet out there. So, I'm on my porch enjoying a smoke, scrolling on my phone. I keep the porch lights off in the summertime because it attracts mosquitoes and June bugs. The light from the phone made it hard to see anything in front of me, but my dog was hanging out by my side the whole time. So not only did I know it was safe, but I also had something guarding me, and the chance of some monster came out to try to get me. I say monster because in over 20 years of living in the neighborhood, no person or wild animal ever bothered anyone. You'd maybe hear coyotes howl between 11 and 1 a.m., but they don't dare go near humans. Any fear I would ever have out there was if monsters were real, and I've yet to see one, so I wasn't too concerned about my surroundings. As I'm engrossed in my phone, I hear to the right of me, rustling in the grass. In fact, it sounded as if something large was out there, maybe about my dog's size. It sounded like something was dragging itself slowly, on its belly right for me. My first thought was, man, my little doggo is being silly. She must want my attention, and I chuckled to myself. Not that she was little. That was more of a term of endearment. She was a tricolored pit bull. I tried to look up from my phone to see her in action, but my eyes, as mentioned before, had trouble adjusting to the dark. And that second, from the left of me, mind you, that I had thought my dog was to the right. To the left of me was my pit bull, running as fast as she could from the backyard out from the side fence, barking and growling louder than I ever heard before. Just as my eyes adjusted, I caught a glimpse of something gray and sleek and fast, and just about the same size as my dog, much, much skinnier and much quicker, almost like it was emaciated. Something went tearing off into the night, my dog on its heels. She chased her to the pond on the 7-acre property. She came back partially wet, her fur still sticking straight up, still looking towards the pond to listen for a growl. She's not the type to chase animals. She was the type to play and be sweet. She grew up with kittens and never barked at door knocks or anything like that. After that, I never sat out front at night to smoke at that house. I have now always stayed on the enclosed back porch. A month later, I'm sitting on that porch, listening to coyotes yip and howl. I had decided it must have been a stray coyote, though. It looked like it just had mange or something. I was trying to rationalize it. So I'm on that porch, and suddenly the coyotes abruptly stop. I then heard this terrible noise. It sounded like something dying. Like a house cat, but much more guttural. Before I could move, I heard the most terrible scratching sound I've ever heard on the outer wood walls. It was more like a grinding. I ran inside and cowered in my room. The next day, I went out to look at the wall, and sure enough, there were what appeared to be 20 clawed scratches on the wall, some very deep, like they were almost cut with a knife. This happened in Glenpool, Oklahoma. We don't have mountain lions. We don't have bears. Well, not typically. especially where there aren't any wooded areas like this small town. But I tell you, from what I've seen, these scratches kind of look like how large cats and bears are. There are no woods, no trees, it's all open plains. Where would it live for a month? Does it have a secret burrow by the pond? Now, when I stay at my parents', I never go outside at night unless someone is with me and all the lights are on. I noticed even the cats won't go outside at night. Even the stray cats get under the house and only come out during the day, which is odd for a nocturnal animal. I don't know what it was that was stalking me last summer, but I don't think it was the first time, or at least part of me feels like whatever it was is still lurking around on the darkest nights. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I lived in the mountains, renting a house with just me and my mom. I really liked it up there and still visit with my dad as he owns it now. I'll tell a story as it all happened in the same week. The first thing that happened was I was going to play with Legos. I think when we moved the box, there was a baby rattlesnake behind it. We killed it with a shovel, but it almost bit my mom. The next thing that happened was I was playing outside in the dirt, and I saw 2 baby bears in my yard. They didn't do anything except stare at me. I ran inside scared. We all went outside, they were gone. The last thing lasted 3 days, the first time it happened. I was playing on my mom's old computer when I heard this banging sound. So I went to the kitchen and saw this quote-unquote bear. It was like mutilated and foaming out of the mouth. My mom called the police, and when they arrived, the bear ran off. The second day it was circling our house and tried to get on the roof, but failed and ran off. The third night was the worst. I was sleeping in my mom's room because I was scared of this bear thing, and then we heard scratching on the back door. My mom made me stay in the room, so I did. When she went to the door, it was clawing and banging on the window, so my mom called the police again. This time, they saw it and chased it off into the woods. My mom described it to me. She said it was bloody and had this evil energy coming off of it. It was foaming at the mouth, like it had rabies or something, but it didn't act like it had rabies. We did hear that they found this creature and killed it later on. See, what's weird about it is, it was like skinny and humanoid-like, almost looking like a bear, with thick, shaggy fur. But it had no weight to it. It's weird. It's almost like there was a shell. I don't know. Maybe this is encrypted. Maybe it is. I don't know. I know it's not the scariest story you've ever read, but I think it still qualifies. This horrific moment when I was just 5. But I somehow remember this very vividly. I was living in Kentucky at the time, and my dad was in the army, so my mom and brother and I were living at the army base. The houses were nice, but they definitely had to be haunted for how long they'd been there. I haven't had any paranormal experiences there. This was the only thing I guess you could do.
You know, life is busy. Doctor's appointments, Little League, our careers, all while trying to figure out what's for dinner. Our daily routines can keep us focused on our financial goals. Possible risks keeping us from reaching our dreams. Like, what if I die? Would my family be Is my retirement plan on track? Are there financial opportunities I've missed? What if I get cancer or a heart attack? How would I pay for those expenses? Thankfully, there is a solution to these potential risks. Life insurance. What most
To call paranormal. I was in the living room by myself. I was watching cartoons, as any 5-year-old would. My kitchen at the time was right by the living room. So as I'm sitting there, I have this weird feeling, and I feel something staring at me. I instantly froze and did not make any sudden movements. I see at the corner of my eye this big black figure moving. I could tell it was moving slowly, almost as if it was dragging its feet if it had any. I could tell it was black and very tall, but it looked as if it was almost wearing a black coat or something was wrapped around it. I still don't know to this day what the exact features were or what this thing was. Obviously, it wasn't my mom because she's short, and definitely not my 3-year-old brother at the time either. It was tall and lanky and looked like it had claws. It was walking from the kitchen to the hallway back towards our rooms. I was trying to ignore the presence of this thing. I just wanted it to go away. So I closed my eyes and sat very still. After just a few minutes, I opened my eyes and looked over there, and it was gone. I was scared for my life. I ran back to my mom's room and I was crying because I was just so scared. She asked me what happened, and I didn't tell her what I saw. I was just crying. Recently, I had asked my mom if she remembered that, and she told me she did, and she mentioned how she saw red eyes late at night by her TV one time, when she was trying to sleep. This wasn't the only time I've ever had paranormal encounters, and not the scariest, but this was my first. It may sound crazy, but I do wish now that I looked at this thing, just to see what would have happened and where it went. I used to have these little hunches that this thing lived in our basement. Thanks for listening to these creepy, allegedly true encounters with cryptic creatures sent in by viewers just like you. Now, at the end of the day, it is up to you whether or not you believe in these tales. I'm not trying to convince anyone. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it's a cryptid story or something else, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in this world. Stories like yours that help keep this show going. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button as a help.
My dog thinks I'm a genius. Because geniuses...
Okay, so this has been going on for a few months now, but things just went to the next level last night. I was about 6 months pregnant when this started, back in October. We had only been living in this house for about 2 or 3 months, and everything had been normal. The first few times it happened, I didn't think too much about it. I just thought it was a bird or something. The whistling always happens at night. It is one higher pitched whistle, a very short pause, and then a lower pitched whistle. I'll start with the first time I noticed there was something odd. I was probably 7 months pregnant, and my dog and I were napping on the couch. For whatever reason, while I was pregnant, I would moan in my sleep. Sometimes, so loud I would wake myself up. So, I was asleep and I woke myself up moaning, and then I heard the whistling. But it sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. I know I was just hearing things because the dog shot up and looked in the kitchen and his ears perked up. After that happened, I noticed that the whistling was only happening at night, and I had never heard a bird or anything else make a sound during the day. It started to become more frequent, but the dog and I were the only ones that were hearing it. I told my husband about it, but he just kind of brushed it off. The second weird thing that happened was, at the end of my pregnancy, my husband and I were in bed. I was sleeping and he was watching TV. I was moaning like normal. My husband said it was getting louder and louder. Then he heard the whistling and I stopped moaning. He woke me up to tell me this. After I had my daughter in January, the whistling had pretty much stopped until the last couple of weeks. I have been hearing it almost every night on Sunday. My husband and I both heard it. Last night, after my husband got home from work, he took the dog outside. We have a very long and narrow patch of trees directly across the road from our house. I was in the house. The windows were open, but the curtains were closed, so I could hear but not see. So, according to my husband, the dog was peeing and really focused on past trees. Then he saw a cat, but the cat was stalking something in the trees. After the dog was done peeing, he took off. At first, my husband thought it was the cat, but something shot out of the trees. In the house, I heard claws on the pavement. First, really fast ones, then obvious strides of our dog. I heard my husband yell for the dog to come back. When they came in the house, it looked as if my husband had seen a ghost. He said that whatever came out of the trees was pretty big. About as big as our dog, who was a Doberman Pinscher about 110 pounds on all fours. It ran so fast that he said that he wasn't paying attention and probably would have missed it if he wasn't looking. It looked more like a human, though, that was on all fours. It was dark in color and jumped in the air and disappeared. All last night, the dog did not want to be alone. Usually, he sleeps on the couch, but my husband had to throw him out on the bed. This morning, my husband went outside to the trees to see if there was any obvious spot where his thing was. Backs up to the trees. He came outside when my husband told him there was something there last night. And he said, "Oh, it won't hurt nothing." I can't help but to think of this creature and the whistling are related. If anyone can help me figure out what it is, it would be greatly appreciated. Recently, my husband and I traveled to Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge. We had been there a few times, and the Parallel Forest is our favorite place to go. But this time, something weird happened. I wanted to show my husband the stone rock circle we started, so I started walking down by the path I knew led to it. Then, for some reason, I found myself walking off the path to a group of trees by themselves. My husband asked where we were going, since we were no longer on the path, but I just kept going. I don't know why, it was like something was drawing me in. I was filled with a scene of hopelessness. It wasn't until I was standing in the middle of a creek that I realized I hadn't been in control of myself. I brushed it off and got us back to the right trail, telling my husband I just get turned around sometimes. After seeing the stone, we headed back to the car. Towards the entrance of the forest, we saw a longhorn cow. We stopped to take pictures. Then it started shaking wildly, almost like it was being attacked by a hive of bees. I've grown up on farms, but I've never seen a cow move like that. Next thing I know, it started charging us. We ran for it, and the second we exited the trees, the cow just stopped, turning around and walking off. I don't know if I'm just going crazy or not, but that's weird, right? I've heard stories of stuff like that happening in these woods, but never thought they were true. But after all that, I'm really wondering about these Boar Man stories. Like, could he really be controlling animals and affecting people's thinking? Can't believe I'm asking this about the Boar Man. But I know one thing. I'm never going back into the Parallel Forest. I have a few stories. I don't know why things keep happening to me, but I have no reason to lie. I can't tell my stories in normal settings for fear of being branded a nut. But the following actually happened to me, and I'd love to hear from anybody who has had similar experiences. I used to work nights in a nightclub in Perth, Western Australia, and on my way home, I had to walk through a large park called Hyde Park. Hyde Park had concrete paths lined with huge Moreton Bay fig trees. They are massive trees with large roots, big enough to sit on. One night, I was walking along the path when I noticed the roots of one of the trees were shaped like a person. I thought it was cool when I got close. I knelt down to have a better look. As I bent down, the figure in the tree looked up at me. I think it was a he. I'm not 100% sure though. He was nestled in the roots of the tree and sort of appeared to be a part of it. He was kind of wet looking. At first, I thought he was the victim of a mugging or something, and I started to ask if he was alright. But before I could get the words out, I realized he was not human at all. He had a big almond-shaped eyes, cat-like I think. I guess he looked like pictures of demons of aliens. Greys to be precise. He had a very kind eyes though, and I wish I had stayed to talk, but I was super freaked out that I ran without looking. The next day I went back to look at the tree, and there was nothing resembling a person at all. It would be kind of a relief to me if I could write the experience off as a trick of the light or something, but I trust my senses. I saw a few strange things in the park, but that was by far the spookiest. Around January 2001, This was a semi-waste ground commonly called the Components Factory thanks to a light industrial area that was now defunct. Besides the local coach park. Driving alongside the road, we noticed a couple looking and pointing up at us. There was something floating above the building. At first, it literally looked like pieces of black rags that were suspended off the building. There was a couple gaps in the rags. As peculiar as I found his lack of interest in this was, I understood that he seemed uneased about checking it out and accepted that he wasn't going to come along. I therefore went my own to the building to see that the couple had moved on, and that the thing was no longer on top of the building, but floated parallel to the ground at the same height that it had been when I originally saw it. I was able to take a closer look at it, and here's when the story somewhat turns weird. What I saw was a moving 8 to 10 meters off the ground. I had the building close to that side. It looked for all intents and purposes like a small and long dog skull, where I could make out the snout part and the concave areas where the eyes should have been. In addition to the least small canine fang protrusion coming out of the end of the snout. The rags seemed to be made of genuine fabric, but it looked like a cross between a hood and a matted fur. It started halfway into the dog skull and hangs loosely for less than a meter in thick clumps. Whatever it was, I could only describe it as inanimate since it was just floating. Hovering is probably a better description. Away from the terminal, it made a beeline as the crow flies past a resident block and out the nearby.
Owning a business means owning a lot of uncertainty, but unknowns bring opportunity too. Like the chance to find new ways of doing business. We can help you set up an online store with pickup, delivery, or shipping, and touch-free ways to take payments too. We have all these tools ready for when you need them. So even though we can't predict the future, we can help you be ready for whatever's next. See everything we can do at square.com.
A long mast of ships in their berths. I had to run around the building to keep up to the marina to see it float away. That was the last I ever saw of that thing, and I've never experienced anything remarkable since, or before that for that matter. The next day, my friend only briefly acknowledged what we saw. whilst driving, but never wanted to know more about it. He moved out from Gibraltar to the UK shortly afterwards, not related to the incident, and haven't seen him since. I would certainly appreciate any input on what others think this may have been. I've always been fascinated by tales of cryptic water monsters, though I've never actually seen one myself. But my stepfather's father, an eccentric, yet sharp to the point individual who ordinarily isn't given to making up fanciful tales, and whom I'll call Bill, once recalled a time during World War II when he was serving aboard a ship that may have been called into the English Channel. He noticed a commotion one evening on the back deck when he went to investigate. Many crewmen were carrying on. Those who happened to have cameras were eagerly snapping photos, though, conveniently, Bill didn't have one. What he claims to have saw was something astonishing. A creature was traveling in the water in a perpendicular fashion, just slowly enough to frighten the crewmen into thinking their vessel would collide with this beast. The creature, whose long back broke the water and looked something like a crocodile, had its head held out of the water as it traveled. Its incredible size was said to be even longer than the vessel itself. Bill stared open-mouthed. As he recounted, the vessel and the creature actually did come very close to colliding, but apparently, the animal had a clear destination in mind. It simply kept on traveling without acknowledging the vessel or looking left or right. Luckily for those on board, and it was not seen to submerge. Crew members followed it with their eyes as long as they were able to until it finally disappeared from sight. This did not sound like a crocodile, even a large one. When I pressed Bill for a better description, he stubbornly gathered his bearings and stated, "Well, it looked like a dinosaur. That's all there is to it, a dinosaur. There's more to it." This was especially chilling to me. My name is Dustin, and I grew up in a town called Cranbrook. It's in southeast British Columbia, in the Kootenays, the middle of nowhere. This story happened about 14 or 15 years ago, 2002 or 2003, with my 3 other friends, DB, PD, and SR. We were driving around the streets of Cranbrook like any other night. It was around 10 p.m. DB was driving his mom's car. SR was in the back seat behind him. PD was sitting passenger and I was behind him, if my memory is correct. We came to a stop on 2nd Street, crossing Cranbrook Street north to the 10 Book Forestry building. To our left, waiting to cross the crosswalk, stood a young boy who was wearing what looked like a hospital gown and seemed to be glowing. His gown, his skin, and his hair, all illuminated. As the boy began to cross, I recall him appearing to be an old man suddenly, still glowing. Once the figure was directly in front of the car, it was now an old, haggard, aboriginal woman. The gown and glow were gone, and she was wearing layers of old tattered clothes. Once she got to the sidewalk, she collapsed, folded right over and fell into the ground. Edie rolled down his passenger window and asked if she needed help. Her response was quick and very raspy and shrill. She said, "No, I don't. Call the police, now." He must have been in shock, or even just memorized by the incomprehension, because we just went to Safeway, which was open until 11 p.m., and called 911 on the payphone. By this point, we were in giddy frenzy trying to rationalize what we saw. It spiked our curiosities and imaginations. We were all about 18 and 19 years old then. When we went back to the intersection, the police were already there. The woman had made her way toward the Tembec building, sitting against the brick wall. The police were approaching her, and she sat in the darkness. We drove off, and that was the last we heard of it, or followed up with it. I often wonder what it could have happened. If the police called, did they offer help? What if we let her in the car, or even got her to the car for aid? What was it, an alien, a skinwalker, or a figment of collective imaginations? To this day, all 4 of us remember what we saw, and although certain details may differ in our stories, We all agree we witnessed something unexplainable. This happened well over 10 years ago, so I cannot provide dates, but my experience happened in Salt Fork, Ohio. I had forgotten about it for years until a silly television show jolted my memory. Now, the more I think on it and write on it, the more details I remember, and the more intriguing it becomes to me. I became very excited after reading another member's story that sounded so similar to my own experience. It sent chills down my spine. This is a post I made after reading a similar account by another member, and I am of the opinion that we experienced the same thing. So, here's my story. I had just seen an Animal Planet cryptozoology episode that took place in the same remote area that I had my encounter. When I wrote my reaction in the comment box of the other members' experience, I was more focused on the details that surfaced from my memory than the first time I was told about that happened. So here is the second that I recall. We're sitting at a campfire, eating hot dogs and cleaning our rifles from a day's volley of rounds. When out of nowhere, this horrible, ear-piercing, aggressive scream came from the tree. No more than 20 yards away. This thing was so loud that I could feel the vibrations of the sound waves go through my chest. Just like being at a metal concert and being too close to the speakers. Whatever this thing was, it was angry, and it seemed directed at us. I am sure you are familiar with wildlife indigenous to your area, as in, you know the sounds they can make. I am also a veteran camper, and I know all of the sounds that the night brings from coyotes, owls, foxes, etc. Let me just say, this is like nothing I have ever heard, period. This was no coyote, fox, bear, owl, falcon, or etc. The three of us jolted up and instinctively ordered our rifles in the direction of the awful noise. I wanted to pull the trigger right then, but I was afraid things would go from bad to worse. My buddy Brian, voice shaking, goes, I'm going back to the car. We started slowly walking towards the car. I still had my Remington aimed steady at the group of trees, ready to fire. As I got a bit further away, I thought that maybe it would not follow us if we let off a shot or two. So I did. I fired 2 rounds into the dark woods. And just based on intuition alone, I think whatever made the sound was long gone. We made it to the car and sat inside, clutching rifles until daybreak. When we got back to the campsite, everything was how we left it. Nothing was missing or damaged. The three of us have never been so scared, and we haven't spoken since the incident. So this happened a couple of years ago. I was walking home from my work, and my road is a busy road, so it's busy with people in cars, and it was rush hour. I noticed that something seemed to be wrong with their face. Didn't too much and avoid being rude, but I couldn't help but noticing that they were walking in a hurried way and as if they did not want to be seen, keeping their head down. As I couldn't resist getting closer, so I looked over to their face and it was almost completely blank. Like when you're editing a photo and you turn the brightness or contrast all the way up so all the facial features are gone apart from the eyes, mouth, and nose. This is what this person's face was, but instead of pure white, more the yellowy white of the moon or magnolia paint. That's not all. When I looked at their face, religious images flooded in my mind of horror, evil, and hell. That was a total fist for me. I'm not a religious person at all. My mind got very bad vibes from what I had just seen. It decided that I should forget about what I'd seen and not think about it again. Very unusual for me. I'm not usually a curious person, but I felt compelled to forget about this ASAP. So, I actually made an effort to not think about it, and didn't tell anyone about it until several weeks later when the emotions I felt were more faded. I don't think they just had a deformity or skin condition, because there was nothing there, rather something. And the emotions and images I got from looking at their face were unlike anything I've ever experienced. I wish I hadn't tried to forget it so instantly, as I might remember other things about it that could lead to more logical explanation. Face were unlike anything I've ever experienced. I wish I hadn't tried to forget it so instantly, as I might remember other things about it that could lead to a more logical explanation or...
Here.